Hello and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up. It is time for me to start pouring these two-part molds that I made in a previous video. So come on, let's do this. This video, I'm gonna go start to finish on the pouring of the fruit and then the glazing and the firing, so long as I have a successful piece. There is part one of this video. If you want to check that out, I'll put the link in the description. It is where I made the two-part mold. I did not do any of the pouring or casting. That's gonna all be done in this one. My molds have been drying for quite some time. I made these in the beginning part of December. It is now January 19th, so they've had a good month to dry. I'm gonna try pouring them and see how successful I was with the shapes. Hopefully at least one of them works properly so that I can have a set of apples or a set of pears to put into my centerpiece. I've had a look at them. They all look pretty good so far. There's only really one way of knowing whether this is successful or not, and that's to go ahead and pour them. So yeah, I'm gonna grab my straps and we're gonna bind these up and pour some liquid slip into them and see how well I did on these molds. They need to be banded together. What I like to use are strap clamps. You can also use really large rubber bands, and that's what I use with my class. Come on now. The giant drawing slates, they look like giant clipboards. They have these large rubber bands that you can get to put on the end of it to hold the paper down. They work really well. The thing is that the rubber bands will eventually wear out, and over time, I feel like you can't get a good, secure grip. For the sake of that assignment, it works totally fine. But for here in the studio, I tend to just use these strap clamps because I find that at least I can get a nice, secure, tight fit. These can run anywhere between $5 to $20 a strap clamp. The rubber bands are something like a buck a piece. That's apple number one. Apple number two. Oh, of course. Well, covered in clay. Pour until I see it come up. Whoop, there we go. And what's gonna happen here is this plaster is gonna begin to soak up all the water in the slip. And when it does, the slip will shrink because the water comes out of it, so it'll be less and less. And after about 15 minutes or so, I'm gonna have to check it and make sure that I don't need to refill, that I haven't lost too much slip, and top it off. And then I will be slowly checking for the wall thickness. I'm gonna want my wall thickness to be a good 1/4 of an inch thick before I pour off the excess. And you can see it's already happening, starting to go in there. Now, how much this sucks up and how quickly this happens all depends on how long your mold has been drying, how dry the plaster is, meaning how much water it can suck out of it. So at a certain point in the day, I'm not going to be able to pour anymore because the plaster will have sucked up too much water and will need time to dry out. On a good day, I can get about 3 pours. That's being cautious. I like to go slow. I like to let the object release on its own. That'll make more sense in a little bit when I get to doing that part. I'm going to pour off the excess, and then this mold's going to be drying. As it begins to dry, the clay will shrink. The object will kind of shrink up and release itself from the mold automatically. I don't like to try and yank it out before it dries on its own. You could damage your object that way. Again, this will make much more sense when we get to that stage. Now you can see just in that time how much water has sucked out of this one. I do have some room in the sprue. The sprue is much higher than the object, so I don't need to worry about my object being not fully resolved. If your sprue is small, that is something you want to think about. When the liquid goes down, at a certain point, it might go too far down into your object and you end up with an uneven fill. That sprue is 2 inches and my well is 3 inches, where I see the hole going down 3 inches. Then potentially the first 1 inch of the top of that piece of fruit is not going to have as thick of walls as the rest of it. So this is why you kind of want to keep an eye on it and top it off to make sure. And I'm going to top this off now since it's there. Just going to keep an eye. I'm going to set a timer for about 15 minutes. And then we're gonna check the wall thickness, see where we're at. The first one should go much faster than all the others because the plaster is completely dry. It hasn't absorbed any water yet. So as you continue to use this mold over and over again in that same date, the plaster keeps absorbing more and more water, and therefore it will take longer and longer for each piece to come out. I'm gonna go wash my hand. Ooh, slip. If you are trying to test the thickness, usually I just take a fettling knife. I don't have one close by, but I'll just take my needle tool. I usually try to avoid using the needle tool for this job because I don't want to grind into my plaster, but this has a bunch of foam stuck onto it from something else I was doing. It should be safe. Usually what I do is I just kind of cut in a little bit and then I can eyeball where the line is. Alright, so now I know. I really need to find a fettling knife. This is no bueno. Alrighty, so I have a good, that's definitely at least a 1/4 of an inch thickness there. I can test against the wall and just see how much I have going on. That is what I want, so it is time to pour. Sometimes you'll get a skin over where your slip inside is like skinned over. It won't pour out, so you have to keep an eye on that. If that does happen, you just take the back side of your needle tool or stick the front side of your fettling knife in and just gently kind of mush it up in there. You don't want to go jamming and hitting a side. You're trying to release the liquid because the next step is to pour out any of the excess so it can dry. You want to be careful not to jack up your sides, but you want to get a good flow going so you can do this. Come on. Come on. Quite a large amount of liquid should come out, so if it doesn't, then you got a flow problem. There we go. Where those muscles come in handy. Alright, at this point what I like to do is usually keep this propped up. I'm going to find something to prop this on. A couple sticks usually does the trick. Oh, here we go. I'm going to balance these two like this and set this like this so that the hole has some free space and any of the excess liquid will drip out while it's drying. So that's one. I'm going to repeat that with these other two. If you don't do a good job at getting all of that stuff out, you could have a very heavy object by the time you're done. It may fire improperly. It's going to have a weird weight to it. It might not glaze well. So really important to make sure you remove all the excess that you can. The next move is they're going to sit here for quite a while for them to dry. I probably should go in and release a little bit of the rim before they do that. I'll show you that really quickly. Before I fully let this set up, I'm going to take, should be fettling knife, but all I have on me right now is this needle tool. So I'm just going to come around and cut around where that flange is, where it kind of went over itself. I don't want it in another direction when it goes to shrink. If I have it on this extra surface, that's going to be problematic. But if it is only in this vertical position, when it shrinks, it'll shrink in. A minute ago, I had it all stuck over here. So now it's going to shrivel up instead of pulling from along here. If it did that and I left it on there, it could possibly crack, and I've had that happen. You gotta throw it back in the batch and try pouring it again. I'm just going around and relieving just on the inside of where that sprue is. I'm gonna do that for all of them. I am gonna open up these molds, only open up 1/2, see if I can get it to release. Alright. So I'm not going to yank this out. My goal is just to get one side open so it can have more room to do some drying. I will have to come out here first thing tomorrow morning if I am going to leave these, because I don't want it to fully dry to where I can't repair that hole. I think that they're too wet and it's kind of damp today, so I should be okay till morning. If they don't lift, I don't force it. So this isn't coming apart, I'm not gonna touch it. Same deal here. Oh, alrighty, so I'll check back in maybe another half an hour and see if I can remove the top. Before I walk away from all of this, I gotta clean up my pitcher. I just poured in a little bit of water, about an inch worth of water at the bottom of that pitcher, and I'm using it to clean up the slip that's stuck to the pitcher. I'm gonna pour this back into my main bucket. Every time you pour a casting and then you save the extra slip, you end up losing some liquid. There's a certain point where you can't really keep doing this, otherwise the slip will start to settle at the bottom, and then you'll end up losing the properties of it that make it slip-like and make it work. But every now and then I will add a little bit more water because I'm losing that water into the plaster and it makes the slip a little too thick. I'm gonna go ahead and add that back in. Bits like this is the stuff I cleaned off on the top. I'm gonna throw some plastic over this and save this because this is gonna be handy to patch the holes once this fruit comes off along with the sprue, because I'm gonna have a giant hole in the side of this fruit. I need some extra clay of the same clay body to repair it. These molds are still way too wet. I do the whole pickup test and no go. So I am gonna leave these overnight. Oh, got one, woohoo! I'm still gonna leave these overnight because they need time. Maybe. Let's see if I can do it the other way. When I touch it, it's still way too soft. It's leaving fingerprints and I don't want to risk it. I am gonna leave these the way it is overnight. It's really damp and I will try and get out here first thing in the morning, but I'm really happy with the detail I see so far on the bottom end of these pieces. All right, jumped out here because I gotta get these out. See what we got. All right, nice pair. Got to deal with this hole, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this sprue off. And as expected, there is a hole there, so I do have saved some of that stuff that was super wet. Patch my hole. And the other thing I have is a flashing line. This flashing line is where the mold was divided, so I want to go in and clean that up as well. But you want to make sure your tools are really clean, you don't have anything on them, otherwise you're going to get bits of junk all over. This clay is super impressionable. Clean up any bits of plaster I have. I need to give this an air hole because I just covered over the main sprue hole, and if I don't give this an air hole, it will for sure blow up in the kiln. I don't want to lose the texture of the fruit, so I'm trying not to handle it too much. Once it's bisqued, I can go in and always sand out a little bit of this imperfection where I filled the hole, but I don't want to do so much handling that I mess up the rest of the texture. I'll do some blending here, but you can see even my fingerprints will be picked up by this. I think I put my air hole here, top where the stem would normally be. That'll do me. Now because I just filled that hole, I'm gonna wrap this in a little bit of plastic so that it can fully equalize and that hole can become all the same consistency. But I'll show you the details of this pear. Some really nice details here. This is a very heavy piece. I probably could have gotten away with doing a lot less liquid, pouring out much sooner, but it is what it is. I'm going to just gently set that here. I do have to work today, so I will not be able to be out here futzing with these things. You know what? This is what happens when it is seriously like 7 o'clock in the morning and I have not had my coffee yet. It's barely functioning, but once you get this process going, you gotta keep it going. So any extra bits of this, you can save like another bucket where you do your pouring out of the molds and stuff like this that are too hard, where you can have time to strain it. I should not have poured it back into my main bucket. I should have poured a second bucket for straining purposes. That's why this is so chunky. I think this entire bucket needs to be strained, so I'll probably just throw this right back in the regular bucket and call it on that one. All right, let's see apple number 2. I should say apple number 1. Depending on how big of a mess you put up against your piece will determine how big of a sprue hole you got to patch. This has a little bit more plaster. My experience, the first casting is going to have the most plaster stuck to it. After a while, eventually you stop picking up those bits of plaster. I'm really excited about these. They look really good. Why haven't I made more fruit earlier? Oh, I should have made more fruit sooner. Well, here we are. I hadn't gotten to the lemon molds yet, and I was thinking ditching them, but now that I see these fruit actually cast, I just might have to go back and do them in anyway. Do I want the hole there or on the bottom? I really like the bottom. I don't want to mess with that bottom. So we're just going to take it at the stem point. Oh, see, got a flashing here. There's a chunk missing out of my mold. This happens if the mold was messed up. And a lot more plaster going on and a lot more flashing on this one. Flashing is the extra bits that are around that were not intended. So the flashing would be the little extra flare out bits that I got, not the plaster that stuck. That extra line that I'm cleaning up. This one had a dimple. I rather like the dimple. Not thrilled about the plaster. If there is too much plaster, it's too difficult to clean, then usually I throw away the first casting. Fortunately, these molds are pretty clean, considering. A lot of times you end up throwing away that first one. It's like losing the first pancake. I'm really happy and surprised that all three seem to have worked out pretty well. I do put in the air hole last. Having a bit of air tension helps when you're filling this hole. The air inside helps kind of keep it inflated while you're blending this out. If you put the air hole in before you fill up this hole, you'll lose the pressure that's inside, helping that stay taut while you're blending, and you may get collapsing. Mold making is one of my favorite processes. I really love the entire process of making them and then making the object. Honestly, I've made molds where I only ended up using one object. So I made an entire mold just to get a one. And it's like total opposite of why you would make a mold. But just because I love the process and I wanted a perfectly rendered piece out of ceramic. Notice I'm not slipping and scoring because it's so wet and I have caught it on time, and because of the elasticity of this slip. I don't need to do that. If I was using this as a press mold, you would have to slip and score. In this case, I don't need to. And then my extra safety precaution here is this wrapping it up for an extra night. These have had a full 24 hours to dry. I'm gonna go ahead and take them out of the plastic. I'm really happy with these apples and the way they turned out. I'm gonna set them aside to dry, and then I'll be packaging them up to bring them over to campus so I can fire them up. But while I have things going, and it's actually pretty sunny today, I'm gonna go ahead and get another pour in. It is about 10:15-ish in the morning. I might be able to get 2 pours out if I can get cranking on this. Unwrap the rest first. Oh, look at this pear. I really dig the pear. I just want to go buy more fruit and start like making more molds. Ooh, oh, they look so good. All right. Stop oogling my fruit and get this poured up with a new round. Okay, I have a strainer or a sieve, a dependent sieve, and a bucket that is way too small. This is designed to go over a 5-gallon bucket, so hopefully I don't make a really big mess. That is going over that, and I'm just gonna start pouring my slip in there, strain it, and of course, one right big mess. Come on. It is really, really cold in here. This slip. My hands are frozen now. If you don't do this and you pour with lumpy bits, you're gonna see little blemishes on the surface. You also might get weirdness happening in the walls. Parts of the walls are thicker. That could create glazing inconsistencies, firing inconsistencies, weight problems. The object might like wanna lean to one side, not quite do what you want it to do. You don't really wanna pour your clay down the sink either. It's kind of the same deal with your plaster. So you wanna probably rinse this off in a 5-gallon bucket like you did with the plaster. This will just as easily clog your drains. You could just set this aside, let it dry out, and then bang it out. Sweetheart, sit down on your chair. What's wrong? Go ahead. Okay, into the pitcher it goes. Still a bit chunky, but better than it was. This is like a ridiculously messy process, if you can't tell. If you should spring a leak on the sides of your pieces, then you either don't have the mold lined up properly, or your system of clamping, elastic, rubber banding, whatever you're doing is not tight enough, or you matched up two of the wrong molds. If you see that, then there's something funky going on. Alrighty, and I'm gonna set my 15-minute timer, top these off, and repeat the same process I did for the first round. My fruit have made it out of the kiln. They are bisqued. I'm going to begin my glazing process. I want to go with a very simplistic design. I decided that since the color scheme for the Woodland Feast is brown, green, a monochromatic green going on, because I consider the brown neutral with little flecks of copper and white, this is going to be the overall color scheme. I'm going to stick with that, and there's something about having this organic object with a very clean geometric line running through it. So what I want to do is to take some tape, and I'm going to run a line of brown, a darker green, and a light green around the edge, and then that's going to go into one firing. And I have purchased some copper luster that needs to be done as an overglaze. I'm going to run a copper line at an angle, almost like a sash along the fruit, to add a bit of that metallic fleck to the fruit. I'm looking at these and I'm thinking I might want to take a bit of sandpaper and just sand down a bit of the surface. The other thing I'm going to be doing is I did not put my clay stamp on these. I wanted to retain this shape, so what I'm going to be doing is using that mark, which is always a maple leaf with a swirl around the center, as part of the design. So that's going to be the center here, and then I will have the lines running along the side. So hopefully this works out. Hey, baby girl. I just have some parchment paper that I have stuck my tape to. Now have my outline there. Find a good spot. And I get it good and burnished on there, so I'm just using the back end of my paintbrush. And I have underglazes. I'm using Mako underglaze, and I have a chocolate and a sand. The chocolate is going to become my top brown line, and the sand I think is just a little too light to be shown up against this white. So I'm going to just darken this sand a little bit with a touch of this chocolate. This is the one thing I absolutely love about underglazes, and it's why I use them with my high school students. They have to present a portfolio in order to get into the school. They're already gifted, but most of the things that they had access to were in the 2D realm. Painting, drawing, that kind of thing. And with underglazes, you can really do these graphic things to your ceramic pieces, mix them up like paints, and it's a medium that they're really familiar with. So I'm going to let this one coat dry, and then I am going to apply 2 more coats. And I have to do this to all of these after I sand them, so I'm going to get on doing that. I have an X-Acto knife, so when I peel these off, there probably will be a bleeding, and I will use my X-Acto to clean it up. Or I'm going to get super lucky. Oh, it looks good. It looks good. You know why it's clean? I burnished my tape. I'm going to start with the middle line, and that is going to be the dark green line, so I think that way I can make sure the lines stay fairly centered. I'm just using a thin blue tape, and I'm just going to mask off where that center line will go. Moment of truth here, moment of truth. Not too bad. I got a little bit of cleanup to do. Well, it's hard to know what this is going to turn out to be because this will definitely darken in the kiln. I am pretty happy with the shape of the lines. I think the lines are okay. Okay about me. Nice and subtle. And then I have a copper overglaze that I will also use to do the swirl along with that sash thing that I'm going to have going on over the piece when it's done. So the rest of my afternoon / early evening will be finishing up the rest of this fruit. Oh, if I don't pass out or fall asleep by then. All right. I brought 15 pieces of fruit to campus to fire, and I brought home 10. By the time the kiln was done doing its deeds, I had some issues with some glaze. I'm looking at 10 here right now that have made it fully out of the kiln. I dipped them all in a clear glaze, stilted them, and threw them in. This is the nature of ceramics. You never know what's going to happen. You can do everything you think is absolutely correct and then end up with an issue. I have one more round of baking to do, and this is going to be in my home oven here. I'm adding in this enamel, this stuff. You bake it on. I went ahead and tested one out. It takes some doing. My lines are not 100% perfect. That's quite all right. I actually enjoy seeing the maker's mark. The first thing I had to do was to put in the swirl, and for the swirl I'm using this tipped one. It's a little finicky. If you've ever tried to buy those like last minute, you needed somebody's birthday and you like bought that tiny tube of frosting, the already gel color thing, you know what I'm talking about, it clogs. Well, this thing is no different. It clogged like crazy, and it took about 3 or 4 goes just to get the thing going on there. And even then I'm gonna have to do some cleanup, so I saved one so that I could demo it here. And you have to like go in and make sure that the tip is fully clean, and then it's trying to get it to pump out without clogging. Of course, the one last time it actually worked without any problems. All right, then I have to let it fully dry before it can be handled, and any of that chunkiness, these other ones have dried now before I baked them. I haven't baked any of these yet except for that one initial one I was testing. I'm gonna go in with an X-Acto and clean up some of the chunky, but now that it's like fully set and dry. When you stilt these in the kiln, you end up having little bits of glass shard that stick where the stilt was. I just want to soften these. I threw on a diamond bit onto my Dremel. What I'm going to do is grind down a little bit of those bits on all of the pieces. I probably should have done this before the swirl went on. I haven't been feeling all that great the past couple of days, and I was looking for something I could sit in one place. I'm one of those people that I cannot like sit in front of a TV and rest. I need to be moving. I'm forcing myself to have like a task to do while sitting down. I got my taxes done because what is that sound? Painting on these were one of those tasks. So all right, I'm gonna go ahead and grind this. My only goal with doing this is just to make it smooth to the touch so that, you know, you don't have these little bits of glass shards sticking up. So that will be something I need to continue doing for the rest of those. And then I should have ordered this a long time ago, but I ordered a bunch of packs of 8-inch thick masking tape from Amazon. This would have been great, saved me a heck of a lot of time if I had this stuff when I was doing the first round of lines, but I have it now, so I will be doing this for the running lines. This one is a paint on, so this one I'm just going to use a brush for. It does get plasticky when it dries, so I think I'm going to try and pull the tape off before it sets. We shall see. You got to bake this for 35 minutes in your oven at 300 degrees. When I let it dry and I try to pull the tape off, it's sort of stuck. No, that's a bad idea. I'm going to let it dry. All right, y'all, I am really happy with the way that these all turned out. I did have to give them a second round. That line needed an extra round of taping and I had to go back in and add some more paint, but I'm happy to say that you can reheat this paint no problem. So I went in with a second round of taping, did some touch up, and rebaked at 300 degrees for another 35 minutes, and they're fully set. I'm gonna call it here. I'm happy with the results of these. Next up, I gotta make a basket somewhere to put these in so that they can sit at the center of the table. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already, and stick around to watch this Woodland Feast come together.